virus vaccine mandate from going into effect in Maine. Stocks are higher at the close. This is AP News. British health officials say a private lab may have wrongly told 43,000 people they had negative coronavirus test results.
The UK Health Security Agency said that the Mensa Health Clinic in central England has been suspended from processing swabs as a result of the incident. The agency said an investigation into the technical issues behind the false negatives was underway. The problem was discovered after many people who tested positive in rapid tests went on to show up as negative on more accurate PCR tests. Mensa was awarded a $163 million coronavirus testing contract by the British government in October 2020. Karen Chamas, London.
A judge denied a last-ditch effort to dismiss a criminal case against actor Jussie Smollett, who was accused of lying to police when he reported he was the victim of a racist anti-gay attack in downtown Chicago in 2019. Jury selection in Smollett's trial is expected to start late next month. I'm Ed Donahue, AP News.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
The views and opinions of the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
You have to be strong in today's world. Keep your focus and what you believe in, how to achieve all your dreams. Keep moving forward. Never accept less than who you are. Live your best life. Be strong and free. It's
Back with Nahaja Black is sponsored by Scotiabank, Baja Retreat and Spa, J.S. Johnson, and Central Bank.
Nahaja Black. It's it back with Nahaja Black.
Good afternoon, Bahamas, and welcome to the Hit Back. I'm your host, Nahaja Black. It is a beautiful day here in the 242. I hope you're doing well, taking care of yourself, living your best life today. It's a Friday, y'all, and normally on a Friday we want to take it down a notch, but no, today we're going to up the ante, right? So on Wednesday, I did a show, and that show, the special guest was Dr. Shankara Chetty. Dr. Chetty, of course, you've heard me say it multiple times, and someone's still saying the Indian doctor. No, it's South Africa. Okay? South Africa. And it has been an experience since that day. That from that day on, the conversations have changed in a way where there is now more questions, and questions to me are one of the most amazing things when we talk about progress. One of the most amazing things is curiosity. Don't mind what they say, it killed the cat. Yeah, one cat might die. You learn from that cat's death, but you move forward, right? And that show presented questions where people were definitely intrigued. They wanted to know more. And why did they want to know more? Because we're all in search of answers. We're all in search of how do we live with this thing called COVID-19. We see countries calling it an endemic now, where it isn't just us talking about a pandemic, trying to maneuver through it, but how do we live with it? And all of the things that surround it. Today was another grim reality. We're now at 632 deaths, 10 more persons added to the investigation list, right? So we know that there are, we're looking at one day, October 6th, we had 5 deaths recorded in the last bunch on October 6th, just in that one day. But there's been no day for the past 2.5 months, I think 3 months safely, where we haven't had a death from COVID-19 or the subsequent issues that come from or rise from COVID-19. So what that has led to after Dr. Chetty's show on Wednesday was the need to bring him back so that now, because we know that was recorded, right? That was pre-recorded because of the time difference. When I asked Dr. Chetty if he'd be willing to do it live with us so that you can ask questions, so that our physicians can ask questions, so that we can get further understanding of it, He's willingly and wonderfully said yes. And it is now 10:15 in South Africa. And I'm going to bring on Dr. Chetty because I don't want him to fall asleep before we do our segment. And I want to welcome him back, Dr. Shankara Chetty, on the show. Dr. Chetty, thank you so much for the time again.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Chetty, you know, I always say you'll never acquire greatness in comfort. That show on Wednesday was very much one that was either hailed or nailed, right? Where persons questioned the veracity of your claims, and others are just blown away that something like this is possible, where we can actually be in a world where you can not have these deaths with COVID, that there's a world where you don't have to, it's treatable, right? And that's why I'm happy Dr. Kevin Bethel will be joining us, because he's been proving it in the country anyway. But let's talk about what we discussed on Wednesday, Dr. Chetty. Some of the questions that I've gotten, and I want you to send your text messages 422, and make sure I got all my numbers right now, 422-4796, 422-4796. I also want you to call in 323-6232, 325-4316, or 325-4259. But let's start with the most obvious question that has come out of this, Dr. Chetty. First one out of the blocks. Has your work been peer reviewed? Is it in some sort of research journal? I know that when we first spoke, how you came into all of this, international spotlight was because you submitted your work to your group, to your peers, right? And that's how it started. Tell us how this started, and are you peer reviewed, that process?
The initial work that I did now highlighted a lot of academic nuances about the pathogenesis of COVID, and it threw a whole different spotlight on how we should be viewing the illness. So my initial work was very academic. It was about the understanding of the pathogenesis of COVID, about the missing elements that needed to be added to what we saw. And so I wrote out this article with the intention of sharing the knowledge with doctors around me and patients, so that we could gauge an understanding of what we're doing. It was published in a peer-reviewed academic journal, Modern Medicine, which is the largest academic journal here in South Africa. However, at that point, I had seen about 200 patients. And of course, collating the data, submitting it to journals for review was a task, seeing that we were in the middle of a pandemic. However, I did submit it to a majority of journals I could think of around the globe, Nature, British Medical Journal, and the rest. I had one of two responses. One was either it was too controversial for the time. The second was that I'm not a subscriber to those journals, and they publish information from their subscribers. I found that strange, in that if they are the custodians of knowledge, they should be willing to look at information from wherever. But it was never my intention to publish. So it got published in Modern Medicine, unabridged, unedited, and I was happy that the perspective was shared. Subsequently, I've been through now over 7,000 patients. I'm in collaboration with two researchers. We've just come off a meeting. One is Dr. Marcus Sanchez from Florida. He was in Lapin Community Hospital. And Kenneth Day. Kenneth Day is the researcher as well. How I got in touch with these two gentlemen, Marcus Sanchez and Kenneth Day wrote an article from the pathology they were seeing later on in the illness. And from that pathology postulated that it's likely to be a hypersensitivity pneumonitis that we're dealing with, and not a COVID pneumonia. So they had the pathology and they postulated backwards to say it's likely being triggered by hypersensitivity, and that's the reason for the mortality and morbidity. So I was very excited when they published that article in December last year, that I had someone on my side that had proved this scientifically. Mm-hmm. So I immediately contacted Marcus. We had a few meetings. They are eager to publish my data. I've been too busy treating COVID, and to collect and collate that data is a bit difficult. It is clinical evidence. We have been doing biomarking recently. In the first and second wave, South Africa wasn't too keen on outpatient treatment, so I couldn't get patients to labs and to X-ray facilities on an outpatient basis. But now we've got the ability to do that. So we had a meeting today, and they want to get all my data together and publish it officially in a journal, looking at the data and all the information that can come from that. So yes, it is being published today. We are being in the process of publishing this at the moment, but it has been published in a peer-reviewed academic journal.
Yeah. And just as a note, Dr. Chetty, the volume is a little low. Just maybe if you would come up a little bit more closer to the microphone, because it's just a tad bit low on our end. Yeah, no problem at all. There you go. Now,
let me bring it as closely as I can. There you go.
That's better. Thank you so much. So that's good. You know, one of the questions that was presented is, hey, listen, the pandemic has provided a platform for many persons to espouse their theories, their thoughts, right? One physician of note said, well, okay, but Dr. Chetty has not provided anything new. We know to provide steroids, right? Steroids is not a new medicine on the regimen, right, that we use for COVID patients. And they added one or two more things. But my question to them is, then why is if it's not new, how has he had no deaths? And we have 622, right? So what would you say to those that say, well, it's not new? The 8th day is not new in that analogy. What would you say to that?
Well, when this came to bear in March last year, when I first started seeing COVID, everyone was chasing a virus. We knew that we're dealing with an inflammatory condition and a coagulation problem. So the world knew about the inflammation and the coagulation disorders, but there was no timing or plotting of the illness from the onset into that phase. So my work endeavored to look at this illness from day one to the point of hospitalization. And what I realized very early on is that the 8th day was vital in the change of illness. Now, this is not a progressive illness from day one into inflammation and into coagulation. There's a point in time where there is a complete switch in the pathology that we see. And that pathology switch occurs on the 8th day, very unusually for a viral illness. However, viral illnesses tend to be relatively stable in the way they present themselves, unlike bacterial infections. Bacterial infections start up and become progressively worse, and no matter where in the evolution of the illness you catch the patient, the management is relatively the same, course of antibiotics to curtail that infection. Whereas viruses have a finite life cycle and have an evolution. So if I had to compare it to a bout of chickenpox, it starts off with a fever, a bit of malaise, but you don't have a rash at that point. And then it develops into a mild rash, which crusts and heals, and you get crops. And eventually, after the last crop is healed, the illness is done. So it has a finite life cycle, the illness itself. And so treating chickenpox on the first day is relatively different from treating it on the last day. And so viral illnesses are very important to plot in time and plot a course. And so that advises the type of intervention along the way. And that was always the focus of my work. Now, the 8th day became very significant because every patient that went into the second phase of this illness did so on that vital particular day, and did so in some patients very dramatically. So there was no steady progression. Patients were perfectly well on the 7th day, had thought they had gotten over the illness, and suddenly on the 8th day noticed a worsening of symptoms. Now, pathologically, that does not fit in with an inflammatory process, neither does it fit in with a coagulation process, especially if the understanding is that it's triggered by a viral infection. That would have started on the first day and slowly progressed till it got severe on those 8th, 9th, 10th days. But we did not see that. From the patients I've seen, the first 7 days of the illness was very disjointed, non-linear, compared to the second phase. There was no correlation between the two phases. And that's what led to the understanding that this is being triggered by a hypersensitivity kind of reaction. Now, the hypersensitivity kind of reaction is what triggers the rest of the illness. So as much as we are aware of the inflammation and the coagulation that follows the hypersensitivity trigger, allowing patients to progress to that phase without treating the trigger itself makes it far more difficult to reverse the illness. And I think that when I look at the protocols around the world, all of them have steroids, all of them have anticoagulants in them to varying extents in their protocol, but very few, if any, have embraced the use of antihistamines and montelukast early on in the illness from the 8th day onwards. And I think that's what's vitally important in the success that I've achieved. The plotting of the 8th day to aid me with timely aggressive intervention and the appropriate medication on that day to stem the inflammation and the coagulation that follows. So I think the rub is that the 8th day, yes, it is the start of inflammation and coagulation, but it is triggered by hypersensitivity. And if we do not accept the hypersensitivity and do not treat it, we will have a far more difficult time curbing the coagulation and inflammation that follows. And I think that's the vital difference in the protocol that I have. Speed to recovery is vitally important. And that's what tells the difference between my intervention and other protocols and my success in treating the illness itself. Speed to recovery, I've looked at many medications and I've monitored how patients recover. I've used steroids, I've used the anticoagulation and the rest, but there's no other intervention besides the antihistamines on that particular day that reverse hypoxia timelessly. So the speed to recovery with antihistamines on the 8th day is far better than any other intervention I've seen so far. And that has justified my perspective that we're dealing with a hypersensitivity trigger, which through research with Kenneth Day and with Marcus Sanchez has proven to be true.
Someone asks, what laboratory markers, a doctor asks, what laboratory markers do you use to determine that COVID causes a hypersensitivity reaction?
Okay. Now in that, just to understand what happens during a hypersensitivity reaction, when you react to an allergen, there's a release of mediators that occurs, histamine, leukotrienes, prostaglandins, and platelet activating factor on that 8th day. So early on in the illness, I didn't have the facilities to do such tests, but I needed to prove that there was the swing on the 8th day, a sudden change from phase to phase. Now, to test, we could test the release of histamine. And to test the release of histamine, you need to collect a 24-hour urine sample. Now, that would mean I needed to collect a sample, give a patient a container to take home, and collect a urine sample for the next 24 hours, and of course, delay treatment for that 24 hours. I could not mop up that histamine, it would turn the sample. I would not detect the histamine in the sample. So I could not delay treatment on patients. That was vital. The patient came first. The second would be to look at tryptase levels. Tryptase levels should show some benefit on that 8th day, but tryptase is a slow marker to show up in your blood. And so we saw increases in some patients on the 9th, 10th, 11th day. But that was not close enough to what I was seeing on the 8th day to justify a sudden change on that day. The next marker that I considered was immunoglobulin E on that day. And again, a slow marker to show up. So there's very little that can show a burst of histamine release on that vital day. However, the aim was to show that we are dealing with hypersensitivity. And I think it's clearly obvious the change that occurs on that day. What needed to be proved was that it was hypersensitivity on that day that was triggering this process. And so when I got to, in the second wave, start to see long COVID cases, I took the opportunity there to start to look at IgE levels in those patients, seeing that they had a long-term allergic response and would have a greater time to develop IgE levels significant IgE levels. And in every single one of them, I found elevated IgE levels, very significantly elevated. The usual is below 400. In usual atopic conditions, those that suffer with sinus and hay fever, that kind of thing, it rises to about 300 or 400. But I've seen patients with long-term COVID with values in the 4,000 and 5,000s, which is highly unusual. So that drew my attention as well to the fact that we're dealing with hypersensitivity. I think as well the speed to recovery from the use of antihistamines alone will dictate the kind of pathology we're dealing with. Now, a stat dose of phenergan or promethazine has shown the greatest reversal of hypoxia, or most timiest reversal of hypoxia, of all the medications that have been tried. A single dose of promethazine has the potential to reverse hypoxia almost back to normal within a period of 12 to 24 hours.
A single dose?
A single dose. You see the benefit in 4 hours. I've had patients with 70% oxygen saturations on presentation, and after a single dose improved to 85 within 4 hours, and improved further to over 90 within another 4 to 6 hours. And that's what's negated the need for oxygen in my practice. I reverse the hypoxia timeously enough to negate oxygen requirements by patients. The rest, the inflammation, the coagulation, can be treated at home as long as the patient doesn't require that oxygen and can be monitored as such.
Hold that thought. And I don't mean to interrupt, because there's a question from another physician that's similar to what, on that same vein where you're talking about oxygen. And it says, can you ask, though, in relation to the patient profiles and their risk factors for his group, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, patients with low oxygen saturation levels of 80%, was there other signs of respiratory distress, as it is surprising that no oxygen would have been needed, right? And I want that, because she has another part, but we'll take a break on that before we get to that other part. But just there, is there, she wants to know what, in relation to any comorbidities, their risk factors, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, patients with low oxygen saturation, was there any other signs of respiratory distress? Or was there other signs of respiratory distress, as it is surprising that no oxygen would have been needed?
With the dynamics of the population I serve, I've seen patients with a wide diversity of comorbidities: obesity, hypertensive, diabetics. I've got patients with stents. I have a vast population that are HIV positive on medication. I have young, I have old patients. None of these comorbidities posed any risk as far as the hypersensitivity trigger goes. It does pose some challenges when you manage the illness over a period of time. So I would say that the hypersensitivity trigger on the 8th day is independent of comorbidity. It is dependent on whether you're allergic to the spike protein or not. So to put it into layman's terms, a bee doesn't care whether you fat or thin or diabetic or hypertensive. The only determinant of illness is whether you're allergic to the sting. And so I've seen all manner of people deteriorate on the 8th day. Now, the recoveries with treatment from that 8th day will be determined somewhat by comorbidity. So patients that are diabetic, patients that are hypertensive, patients that have stents, that kind of cardiovascular disease, they in any illness will be a little more difficult to actually manage. And that is expected with any illness. So it contributes to recovery, but it does not play a part in the initial risk of developing what happens on the 8th day.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. Dr. Shankara Chetty joining us. We also have in the backstage Dr. Kevin Bethel. We'll get to some more questions for you, Dr. Chetty, and then we'll bring on Dr. Kevin Bethel in a minute or two. We'll take a quick break. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Caller, I know you're on the line. We'll get to you as well on the other side of the break. You're listening to us on the Hit Back, Guardian Radio. We'll be back after this.
Sugar, let's get sugary. Softer, smoother, and amazing skin. Oh, sugar, sugar, we're the sugar ladies, giving you skin soft as a baby's. Goodbye hair, we'll take good care of you.
Come visit us at Bahar Retreat Spa on East Bay Street. Contact us at 323-6711 or visit us online at www.baharretreat.com.
You have a new text message from Scotia.
Scotiabank is adding text messaging to its communication channels to keep customers updated in quicker and safer ways. As of November 4th, Scotiabank will be using text messaging to provide notifications on the minimum payment required for your credit card and due dates. Customers may continue to access their credit card statements on Scotia Online or through our mobile banking app. Learn more by contacting customer care-bahamas at scotiabank.com or call 356-1697.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
It's the hit back with the hash of black. It's the hit back with the hash of black. It's the hit back with the hash of black. It's the hit back with the hash of black.
And we're back. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. We've got Dr. Shankara Chetty joining us online. All right, Dr. Chetty. So here are the questions that I have for you. And let me see if, we can get, I think we have a caller on the line. So let's get to our caller real quick. Caller, you're on the Hit Back. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Can you hear us?
Yes, very well. This is Dr. Beneby. I'm calling. I would like to ask Dr. Chetty a question.
Please, go right ahead.
Yes, Dr. Chetty, there are two things I want to ask you. One, this 8 days seems to be a magic date. I can't understand that, but I accept as a part of the treatment. But at which point, what factors are factors that make patients not eligible for further treatment? Because you're saying oxygen level as low as 40, and I'm very impressed. But you can treat those and get rapid response. That's the first question. So give me the factors we need to look at to determine that patient should not be treated or is at a high risk that is should become lost no patient.
Hold on. I'm sorry. Your phone was breaking up there, so we couldn't catch the I think about a quarter of your final parts of the question. So just repeat that last part again.
The last part is that which factors determine that this patient is unlikely to benefit from your treatment. Okay? And I have a second part of the question. The second part is I have proven with these patients that the dosage of various drugs make a difference in the outcome. In case of the antihistamine, does the doses of the antihistamine make a difference in the reversal of the allergic process?
Great questions. Don't hang up. I want Dr. Chetty to respond. Dr. Chetty?
Najee, I didn't catch the first part too clearly. Could you just?
Right. What the good doctor was asking is, in terms of the process, where in the process would you say, and caller, please let me know if I'm saying this right, where in the process would you say where your treatment is not effective? Is that correct? And what I'm relaying, Doc?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Where in the treatment is it just not working?
The treatment changes completely between the two phases. The first phase is just a treatment of a viral illness, and so that is generally symptomatic. Patients tend to recover from that. But in the second phase, on the 8th day, if you look at the way it needs to be treated, you've got to start with hypersensitivity. You've got to understand that is where the issue lies. Mm-hmm. So I haven't had any real long-term problems with my treatment. The only place that I find the treatment really, I wouldn't say ineffective, but not completely effective, are those patients that present very late with a severe hypersensitivity reaction. They have some long-term scarring, And because the inflammation has progressed to such a degree, it takes a longer time to get them reasonably fully recovered. So I think the time to presentation is vital in the ability to reverse the illness itself. It has little to do with comorbidities and such. So I think the tiniest intervention is more important than any comorbidity itself. So I've had young patients present very late and very unwell, and it's taken me a while to reverse the reaction that they present with. And I've had some patients with some severe comorbidities present timeously, and it was very quick to reverse it. So I think it's akin to having a severe anaphylactic reaction. And if it's not treated timeously, it spirals out of control, irrespective of your comorbidities. Those with more comorbidities might have a higher risk of injury or death. But that is not to say that people without comorbidities are not at risk, simply because people without comorbidities still are allergic to certain things. And so the spike protein allergy is more important than any comorbidity. We did want to do subtypes of immunoglobulin E, like we are allergic to foodstuffs and dairy and wheat and that kind of thing. And if we could isolate the relevant subtype of IgE, we could risk stratify patients more effectively as to see who's allergic to spike protein, and that would give us a better understanding of who's likely to react on the 8th day. So the comorbidities really didn't play a part, but the speed to addressing the inflammation that's triggered by hypersensitivity on the 8th day was vital in the outcome itself. I think the second part was about oxygen saturations. And there are two factors that play a part there. The patient itself, the comorbidities, do influence the speed to which oxygen saturations can be reversed. But the dose of steroid and, of course, the choice of antihistamine is vitally important. Promethazine, being a first-generation antihistamine, is generally used for anaphylactic kind of reactions. And it has a broad diversity of things that it does. Besides the mopping up of histamine, it has some serotonin, muscarinic kind of actions. And so it helps in those areas, as well as being mildly sedative, helping with the anxiety around that time as well. So I found that promethazine, I've tried cyproheptadine and I've tried hydroxyzine. All of them seem to have similar benefit, but promethazine seemed to be the drug of choice. Yes, there are concerns about dosage, but in a healthy patient, a 25 milligram tablet 3 times a day, as the recommended, is generally safe. You can go up to 100 milligrams a day. In older patients, in those with problems with sedation, I generally tend to decrease the dose to 25 milligrams twice a day. And I make sure that once the reaction has been curtailed and the patient's recovered, I put them onto a milder antihistamine and continue them onto Lupast for a period of at least a month. The antihistamine that I choose as a follow-on is levocetirizine, a 5 milligram tablet, either BD for those who've endured severe reactions for a few days before I decrease to once a day, or in those that are fully recovered, I keep them on it once a day for at least a month to prevent any rebounding symptoms. So the hypoxia with promethazine tends to reverse relatively quickly. In those patients that I've had with very low saturations, those that presented early, remember this, the desaturation with coronavirus can occur over a period of a day or two. Now, those patients that presented on the 8th or 9th day, irrespective of their low saturations, the rebound was quick and effective. However, those that presented later on the 13th or 14th day, their saturations took a little longer to restore. However, to get to the 13th or 14th day, your saturations can't be as low as 40 and 50%. It generally drops to the mid-80s. And so those patients tend to be mildly dyspneic and over a day recover. Their saturations tend to recover to the low 90s and they tend to tolerate room air reasonably well. And so they don't require the oxygen. But if you do not use the antihistamine, then the saturations below 80% will persist for a few days, and that will require the oxygen. So I think addressing the root cause of the problem is vital in reversing the hypoxia itself. And the dose of antihistamine as well. As well, the dose of steroid. It was very controversial, the use of steroids early on in the illness. I think the perspective of understanding that we're treating a hypersensitivity pneumonitis is vital. And if you look at protocols for the treatment of hypersensitivity pneumonitis, the dose of steroid can be almost mind-boggling to the average doctor. When I tell a patient that I'm giving them 50 milligrams of steroids, prednisone, it's usually 10 5-milligram tablets, and that is about as far as most doctors would wish to go. However, with hypersensitivity pneumonitis, the dose of steroid can be increased up to 500 milligrams, which is 10 times what doctors are using. Now, that is patient dependent. So what I noticed through the pandemic was that different variants required different aggressions. So in the first wave, 40 milligrams of prednisone as a start seemed sufficient. Now, what we're looking for is clinical improvement. So you're looking to the average patient improving by the next day. And so I found in the first wave that 40 milligrams of prednisone seemed to do the trick. However, there were those patients that required higher doses because they did not improve that quickly. And there were those that didn't require the steroid because they never had a reaction. In the second wave, we had the notorious South African variant, and we were faced with far more severe reactions on that day. That required an average dose of about 80 milligrams of steroid during that wave of the pandemic, or for the average patient, where I noticed a majority on that dose showed benefit the next day. However, again, there were those that required higher doses. There were patients where I needed to put them on 80 milligrams 3 times a day, and just for a day or two to turn this around, and then I could start to decrease the dose of steroid. Now in the third wave, we have the Delta variant. And I find the Delta variant, we're back to 30 to 40 milligrams of steroid on the 8th day, and it seems to curtail the reaction. So I think the dosage of steroid is patient-dependent and symptom-dependent. But we shouldn't be afraid of using an appropriate dose. If you do not, you will have to keep that patient on a steroid for a prolonged period of time. So it's better to be quick and aggressive, and you shorten the use of steroid. Whereas if you slow to steroids and you don't use an effective dose, the ailment will be prolonged, and that would justify a longer use and exposure to steroid. So I think the aggression and the speed is vitally important, and the dosage dependent on the patient.
Caller, if you're still there, did Dr. Chetty? Yeah, Dr. Chetty answer questions. Any further follow-up question to that?
He gave excellent explanation, but the specific question was not answered, and I am on his side. I think that we need to put more emphasis as healthcare professionals on treatment, equal as we put to vaccination. Indeed, I think that is one area we have fallen short. The last point I'm going to ask him to keep it.
Sorry, just for the record, which question did he not answer? I want him to get that question.
Well, I'm going to ask it again now.
Okay.
Which patients coming will you say to their relatives, I cannot treat this patient because they're going too far? Because he hasn't told me. He claims that he has 100% success, which I admire and I support. But in science, in medicine, there's a point beyond which you expect, because you may not have acted in time, you may lose the patient. Which group of patients or which patient that prognostic factor comes into play?
Excellent question. Yes, that's right.
Yes, there is always a point where you need to draw a line, where you have to consider hospitalization of a patient. When it comes to COVID itself, now we got to understand that we got patients with comorbidities, and that might worsen due to other factors rather than the COVID illness itself. And you might require added services to assist you with that. Fortunately, in my practice, I haven't had that happen. I've had some critically ill patients. Yes, I wish I had the benefit of a tertiary service assisting me in this process. However, with the morbidity that occurred and mortality in hospitals, almost every patient that came to me refused to be hospitalized, even if I suggested it. I've had 4 mortalities, not for any fault of failure of protocol, But out of abundance of caution, family members wanted them hospitalized. They were not critically ill at the time. However, in hospital, the protocol was dictated by the institutions and the management, and doctors refused to follow any advice that seemed to be working. And so they were put onto hospital-based protocols and steadily deteriorated. And those were the 4 deaths that I had. In this wave, there has been concern. With the Delta variant, we've seen a lot more clotting disorders. I think with patients who develop blood clots, but clinically have issues with clotting, will require further care, active anticoagulation, that kind of thing. The problem has been that hospitals haven't come to the party in South Africa, and we're having a lot of difficulty trying to get ancillary services to actually toe the line and follow on with the treatment. So I think I've been blessed in that even the most critically ill patient that's come to me, I've been pushed into a corner where I was forced to offer them treatment. And over a few days, I've had some miraculous improvements. So God forbid that changes. But I think that I wish I had the tertiary services to assist me further in this. But the point is that notwithstanding, if I could do this without the help of tertiary services, it clearly justifies the importance of early intervention. To give you some perspective on that, I did a training course for doctors in Meghalaya. I was invited by the Ministry of Health there to come and train. In that first meeting, the health minister invited all the heads of all the departments, ICU, obs and gynae, pediatrics, and we spent the first meeting explaining the perspective and what we should be doing. And remember, these are the heads of departments seeing patients in a hospital setting. So I explained to them the perspective, and so the meeting went ahead. They understood what the aim was. I was called back 2 weeks later by the minister to say he'd like me to train rural doctors in his country. And so 2 weeks later, we had another meeting. At that meeting, it was opened by the head of the ICU. His name fails me right now, but he wanted to open the meeting with a testimonial. And his testimonial was that in the 2 weeks of changing the methodology with which he treated patients, by adding the antihistamine and Montelukast to what they were doing, he had circumvented 3 out of 4 ventilations in his ICU. And he found that miraculous. And he felt that if he could have that kind of response in his ICU, treatment should be started a lot earlier, and that would negate patients having to get to the ICU in the first place. And that was the reason I was called back to use this protocol earlier down the line. They hoped that the rural doctors in their country could negate this need for hospitalization. A case in point, and what actually brought this out, his grandmom, who's 84, diabetic and hypertensive, had presented to his hospital on the 13th day with a saturation of 60-some-odd%. And they were all very afraid of her condition. But he used the same protocol that the perspective that I've been showing them. He started on the antihistamines and Montelukast and the steroid. She was on high-dose flow oxygen. And the day we had this meeting was the 5th day of her hospitalization. She had already improved to 98% on room air. Her biomarkers had all been stable. And he hoped that in the next day or two, if there were no complications, she would be discharged back home. And I think it was close to his heart that someone so close had recovered so miraculously. And that's the reason they called me back to educate the rural doctors on timeous intervention. And that, I think, is where the light needs to be shed. Timeous intervention on the 8th day, that's aggressive, can negate a lot of the mortality and morbidity we see. Yes, we will see the odd patient presenting too late. And that is something we need the ancillary and tertiary services to be able to deal with. But we don't want to be pushed into a setup where there is controversy about early treatment and hospitals refuse to offer us a helping hand in following on with such patients.
And that's something that's very real. I got a question for you, Doc, before we go to break. Someone says, diabetics normally respond adversely to prednisone as it elevates blood sugar. How can a diabetic respond to treatment in this instance, as they will have to be keenly monitored?
Yes, I see a lot of diabetic patients, and yes, correctly, the diabetic patients do have issues when put onto high-dose steroids, but you've got to consider the lesser of two evils here. I have had diabetic patients that are put onto high-dose steroids who've had their glucose levels spike. That is easily monitored. Patients tend to be able to monitor their sugars at home. A lot of my diabetic patients here in South Africa have a blood sugar meter and monitor their sugars. Now, when a patient's sugar goes up due to the steroid, you must never stop the steroid. You will have a patient that will deteriorate very rapidly. I generally start those patients on insulin. I monitor their sugars once I start the steroid, home-based. And if they start to see sugar values going up, I start to institute insulin immediately. They do, once recovered, come off the insulin very quickly and go back to their routine dosages of medications. Now, as we've spoken about hospital follow-ons, I would have liked that some of those diabetic patients who have their sugar values spike be treated in hospital where they can be monitored a lot more closely. However, a spike in glucose levels in diabetic patients is no reason to withdraw the steroid itself. That should be managed as a comorbidity on its own. We shouldn't withdraw the steroids in the hope of bringing down the blood sugar. The values, the inflammatory markers will definitely raise, and you'll be sitting with a critically ill patient with a good sugar value, and that's of no consequence to anyone.
Let's see. I think, let's see if we can squeeze in one more quick question before we go to break from our caller on the line. Caller, let me get you, Dr. And I make sure I get this right. Dr. Benaby, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Benaby, thanks so much for calling and being on the line. Forgive me, I moved too quickly off of the phone call. Final question. I know we have to go to break for 5 o'clock, but your last question there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Let me thank you for this opportunity. Let me say to the good doctor, I concur with him in concept and principle, but he has not answered specific questions that I have asked, maybe because my questions were not clear. But the last point and question I want to ask him is, what single factor that helps the clinician after the 8 days to decide to treat or not to treat?
Okay, decide to treat or not to treat
Yes,
in terms of...
I agree with everything he's saying in principle and concept, in principle, but he's not being specific. So I'm saying to him, if a patient comes to me with a PO2 of 40, should I still believe that I can save that patient, or 25? What specific factor does stop me from saying to the relative, this case has gone too far, I don't believe I can offer care? Or I offer care to 100% of the patients.
Okay, so do you get that, Dr. Chetty? They want specific.
Yes,
Dr. Benaby wants specific.
I do. Look, I've had the lowest saturation that I've seen in a patient is 40%. That patient was brought to me with an ambulance from her home. The paramedics were called out because she was critically ill. When she got to me, she was on a stretcher with a drip setup and already on oxygen at a flow of about 5 liters per minute. And her saturation had improved to 54%, but I always check saturations of oxygen. So yes, I've seen some critically ill patients who were getting home-based care from paramedics, and other medical services in the area were willing to assist. So when it comes to patients going to hospital itself, I think at some point you have to make a choice and put a patient in hospital. However, patients here in South Africa refuse to be hospitalized. So I do understand your question that at which point do you make the choice that a patient would die? Unfortunately, I have to try. And in all that I've tried, I've succeeded. I've had some slow recoveries. It's taken a week or two, but the benefit has been too distinct. We cannot negate the fact that quick recovery of these patients compared to hospital care showed a drastic difference. So yes, patients do need hospitalization, and if hospitals were on board, I wouldn't be taking the risks I do with patients. But unfortunately, I'm placed in a situation where I have no choice. So when patients come to me, the lowest I had was 40%, and I won in that case. And yes, I guess if I get a patient with 25%, I'll have to take my hands off and say, please get her to hospital. But not without at least trying to stabilize that patient. When a patient comes to me with a bee sting and they're critically ill, I cannot say, no, this is a patient I cannot treat. I'll have to refer them on, but I would at least start to stabilize them and make sure that I get some improvement there. As to the second question about the 8th day and whether you treat and how do you figure to treat, I found a few things that helped me along in that process. The 8th day in the first wave presented with patients showing dyspnea. And I think with the wild type variant, that was blatantly obvious to everyone that dyspnea was of sudden onset. And that's what drew my attention to the 8th day. Patients were asked to present back when they got breathless. Because in the initial illness of with the wild type, breathlessness around the world was of concern, and that is what I asked patients to come back with. And it seemed that that breathlessness presented very suddenly on the 8th day. However, subsequently in the second wave, we had more gastrointestinal symptoms in the first 7 days, as a viral gastroenteritis that seemed to resolve. The breathlessness in the second wave seemed to start only on the 10th or 11th day. However, when those patients presented back to me on that particular day, I always interrogated when the second wave or second phase of the illness started to see whether there was some illness preceding this breathlessness. And I found in the second wave, it was a re-emergence of gastrointestinal symptoms that heralded the onset of the second phase. So I realized that there was no single symptom that would present back on the 8th day that would make me predict it. It was dependent on the different variants that I was dealing with. So very early on in the second wave, I started asking patients to watch the 8th day, and if there were any new symptoms, no matter how mild, as long as they had recurred or were new on that particular day, they should treat it with caution and come back to me immediately so that I could assess them.
Dr. Chetty, hold that thought. Let's take a quick break. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, I, of course, want you to continue that thought. And we will be bringing on Dr. Kevin Bethel as well. This is riveting stuff. And thank you to all of our callers and texters. We have tons of questions for you. You're listening to The Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. We'll be back right after this.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
Good afternoon, everyone. You're listening to the Guardian News Network. I'm Taylor Ferguson. Here's what's making news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Amid a 61% increase in murders, National Security Minister Wayne Monroe says the focus really shouldn't be on counting murder after murder, but getting to the root of the problem. He revealed he is personally looking into the Jerome Avenue shooting that left 6 men dead 6 months ago.
There were allegations that the culprits might have been police officers. That was strongly advanced. That issue would be caught up in who the suspects are, who fled town, and the one who died. So that would be a matter of what information the police have and their evidence.
Though new COVID-19 cases have decreased in recent weeks, Doctors Hospital Chief Financial Officer Dennis DeVoe says hospitalizations remain high at the private healthcare facility. He provided an analysis of the COVID situation during Abaco Business Outlook.
Right now, COVID is at its peak level of surge. You know, if we measure certainly the number of people that are in hospital, our census right now is roughly 61 patients on average. You know, if we look at what's happened over the last 45 days.
The National Security Minister suggesting Bahamians should get more into the practice of recording their interactions with police officers. Wayne Monroe said while officers are now wearing body cams, citizens have the right to collect their own proof as a matter of transparency when they feel they may have been wronged.
It's just very simple. Policemen who are carrying out their jobs correctly and honestly have nothing to fear from the public recording what they do. For myself, in this building I came in, if you come upstairs, you can't bring your phone. Some of it has to do with the fear of people recording meetings. My position is you should only fear a recording of a meeting if you want to lie about what was said in the meeting afterwards. And so the surest protection for the public, for the police, is for there to be a recording of what has happened.
Monroe referenced a recent incident where a man in custody alleged that his dog was shot by police during the altercation. Monroe encouraged people to install their own recording devices at home as well. And that's what's making news. I'm Taylor Ferguson. AP News is coming up next.
Tired of banks forcing you to use technology to bank the way they want you to? Your convenience is important. So no matter what your banking needs, Commonwealth Bank's friendly staff are always available in branch for that personal one-on-one service. But when you choose technology, our online and mobile banking app offers you state-of-the-art functionality. The choice is yours. Commonwealth Bank. Bank the way you want.
If you like Frito-Lay chips like Ruffles, Doritos, Cheetos Smart Food Popcorn, and Funyuns, you're gonna love getting a chance to win great instant prizes this Saturday, October 16th at Solomon's Yamacraw. Join the Frito-Lay Island Wholesale Team between 12 and 3 this Saturday. Make a qualifying purchase of any Frito-Lay's chips or Smart Food Popcorn, and you get a chance to spin and win great instant prizes. And don't forget to put your contact info on your receipt and drop it in the promo box at participating locations for a chance to win bicycles and hoverboards in the grand prize drawing November 27th. Frito-Lay chips, distributed by Island Wholesale.
Coronavirus update. I'm Ed Donahue with an AP News Minute. Stocks finished higher. The Dow up 382 points. Advisors at the Food and Drug Administration are unanimously endorsing booster doses of Johnson & Johnson's single-shot coronavirus vaccine. Advisory Chair Dr. Arnold Monto says people getting the shots need a boost.
What we're seeing is that this is a group with overall lower efficacy than we have seen with the mRNA vaccine. So there is some urgency here to do something.
Johnson & Johnson has a sliding schedule with an extra dose available as early as 2 months after the first one. In Hartford, Connecticut today, President Biden argued investments in child care and other social safety net programs are imperative to keep the country competitive in the global economy.
The average two-parent family with 2 young kids spends 26% of their income on child care every year.
The president is pushing for his big tax and spending plan. I'm Ed Donahue.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
You have to be strong in today's world. Keep your focus and what you believe in, how to achieve all your dreams. Keep moving forward. Never accept less than who you are. Live your best life. Be strong and free. It's the Hit Back with Natasha Black. It's the Hit Back with Natasha Black.
And we're back. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. We are streaming live on Facebook. We are streaming live on YouTube. Feel free to like, follow, share. Really honored to have joining us again, none other than Dr. Shankara Chetty. After the show on Wednesday of this week, we got a lot of questions, some concerns. There was some folks higher up who were like, okay, well, who is this Dr. Chetty? And is he reputable? So I'm so grateful that Dr. Chetty has agreed to do this show today so that our physicians can dig deeper. Because this is a show for our physicians, really, our medical professionals, because they're the ones who are going to have to buy in and say, okay, at least we will do a study. Let's at least do a study and see if we can keep patients out of the hospital. And we also have our own very own Dr. Kevin Bethel. We have Juliet Hepburn, Dr. Hepburn, who's doing wonderful work over there at her facility and trying their best to keep us out of the hospital so that we are not hospitalized, so that we are not finding ourselves. Nobody wants to go to PMH. I don't know anybody. Even when you break an ankle, you don't want to go to PMH. You would ask your private physician to recast that ankle and have surgery in their office versus going to Princess Margaret Hospital. It is what it is. It is what it is. And there's no lie in that synopsis right there. So we have a challenge where someone on my live just expressed that she lost her very good friend from COVID, and that there are too many people we're losing. If there is just a sliver of hope, I think we owe it to our citizenry. We owe it to 632 patients who've lost their lives. We owe it to their families. We owe it to everyone else to say, let us even just investigate. Let us do a small study. We owe it to everyone because we're too small. And now some people have 8 people. One person said that they had 8 people they know. My friend, Christopher Roberts, Pastor Roberts, 13 inclusive of his sister in that number. This is cutting too close to home. Mothers and sons, an entire former member of parliament, Pastor Miriam Emanuel, lost her sister's husband and her nephew. No one should be doing that type of funeral service. We not know. This is not a mass casualty event. It shouldn't be, especially if we have other physicians around the world saying that, hey, we've seen something different. Nothing is wrong with different. We cannot remain comfortable with the status quo if the status quo is not working. And I'm not here to try and break the mold. I'm not trying to be a devil's advocate. I'm not trying to get heat. I'm just like you, wanting my country to get back together and wanting not to have to say, and the death toll in the new COVID numbers, we lost another one, especially if we don't have to lose another one. There's an alternative treatment out there. And I think we should, and special thanks to Dr. Benaby who called in. I want to bring on, and we have another call on the line, but I want to bring on, before we get to the caller, Dr. Kevin Bethel, and back again with us, of course, special thanks live from South Africa. It is right now 11:11, and Dr. Chetty is still on the show with us. So Dr. Chetty, I appreciate you without a shadow of a doubt for the time you spent with us. I want to introduce Dr. Kevin Bethel, medical professional there in Grand Bahama, who himself, Dr. Chetty, as we introduced earlier, has been doing some really good work in Grand Bahama. And Dr. Bethel, I want to ask you this question. From what you've heard with what Dr. Shankara Chetty has presented, and from your experience, give me your review of it, your thoughts on it.
Thank you again, Dr. Chetty, for coming on the show, and thank you again, Nahaja, for having me, and the audience for tuning in. I find it spot on. Everything that Dr. Chetty has said echoes with what my experience has been. We can add additional subtle nuances as we look at, because everyone figures out a different piece of this puzzle as we stumble along and we adapt and we grow. But one of the things that I admired and am glad that he pointed out was something that I pointed out very, very, very early on, that we're dealing with phases of illnesses. So, and I tried to develop strategies for each of those phases right from the very beginning. And those strategies and protocols, and I use the word strategies rather than protocols, because I think a lot of doctors are looking for protocols. They want to be told this is what to do, and when the patient has this number on this reading device, we send them over there. We do, we have some sort of protocol. But this is a crisis. This is, this is all hands on deck, and we don't have the luxury of saying, "Oh, it's not my problem." It is our problem. We don't have the luxury of saying, "I'm going to give up on my patients," and there's a certain point in time where you've gone too far for me to help you. There is no time for that. There has never been since the very first day of this event. We recognize that from the very beginning. So things have grown. So it's very important to understand which state the person that's sitting in front of you with COVID and their extended family who are behind them also sick with COVID. I guarantee it, if they're living in a house with other people. what stage of the illness are they in, and treat it appropriately. There's different stages. So one thing I'd just like to reiterate, because I see this mistake happening so many times here by my colleagues, giving the steroids inappropriately in the acute viral phase. Why would you suppress the immune system in the viral phase? It is very, very appropriate to give it in the second phase, this immune dysregulation, accelerating into a cytokine storm phase. We want to prevent it from getting into that phase of a cytokine storm. So some different groups will divide these phases into little sub-phases depending on how severe they are. But the point is we want to prevent people from getting into that second phase, no matter how we slice and dice that second phase. So, antivirals are useful in the first phase because we want to keep the viral load down low. Why do we want to do that? That sick person that we've sent home has to have other people take care of them. And if they're shedding high amounts of virus, A, they're going to spread it more. And B, if they have high amounts of virus, the levels of, as those viral particles start to break down, the level of this spike toxin is going to accumulate, and more chance that they will end up in this very dangerous 7th day, 2nd week, phase 2, with potential serious consequences of cytokine storm. And so there's nothing wrong with using antivirals at that stage. It is inappropriate to use an antiviral in the late stage. Now, there are some medicines like ivermectin that, because they have multiple mechanisms of action, are both antiviral and anti-inflammatory. So they are appropriate through every single stage of the illness, including the long hauler recovery phase. And this has been looked at in studies. This is not a hearsay. This is not just my clinical observation. It's my clinical experience for sure. But it's definitely not something that is unheard of. It's basic science. And what I like about Dr. Chetty's approach is that he took a basic science approach, which is what I tried to do. Is let's go right back, to the basics of this. Let's look at what we know about viruses, how they spread, and stop buying into the hype. Why, as doctors, are we getting educated from people on a TV that are just reading a script off of a newscast? That who knows who wrote that newscast? And why do we buy that? Why do we take that as gospel when we know different? We have hundreds of years of medical science that tell us that this is the way things go. We look at epidemiologically, virology. We have role models of other viruses. So one thing I also like to point out is that use the HIV model. All right. So HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. So sometimes we confuse the two. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID. So COVID is the actual illness. And that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent the COVID illness. So there'll be many situations, and we all know that, people who test positive, but they hardly have any symptoms. I don't use the word asymptomatic, because really they might be pre-symptomatic, because there is a asymptomatic incubation phase for this virus that hasn't been talked about, where you might just happen to be tested because you need to travel or whatever, or you go and get tested because someone else in the family tested positive, and you might get tested at that stage before you actually present with symptoms. So in all of those stages, there are protocols, from the incubation to the first phase to the subsets of phases through phase 2 and the recovery, and I call it a 5th phase, the long hauler phase. And if you'd like, we could talk about that. That's an amazingly interesting thing about why people get long hauler. It has to do with predisposing factors, but not really. It is also an issue. One thing that was interesting that I noted while we were talking earlier with Dr. Benaby's question and other comments from Dr. Chetty is that very early on last summer, we had indications from the clinical trials with the vaccine that people who have documented histories of having severe allergic reactions were very likely and highly likely to have adverse events to the vaccine. So what is that?
AstraZeneca to be
exactly
right.
Yeah. So I paid attention to that, and I noticed that in my clinical practice, when people had adverse events, blood clots and the like, and the subsequent consequences of those blood clots, which can be a myriad of things. One of the common denominating factors was that they had a penicillin allergy. Not everyone did. Some people had allergies to other things. So it piqued my interest, Dr. Chetty, when you said, we need more research on what subsets of IgG and IgE are involved in this, because it's not necessarily, obvious, but I think that when people are sort of predisposed to having these severe reactions, we've got to be very cautious with them.
Yeah. Just quick response. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I just want to add to that, Dr. Bethel? Yes, you're absolutely correct. What we're having is an allergic response to spike protein. To put the perspective, coronavirus is not the primary pathogen of COVID illness. It causes the flu-like symptoms in the first 7 days. It is spike protein that triggers an allergic response that causes all the mortality and morbidity. So spike protein is the primary pathogen of COVID illness, not coronavirus. Coronavirus is the vector that exposes your body to the spike protein. And yes, it is an allergy that triggers the response. Now, when you look at the vaccines itself, exposure to the same spike protein is going to trigger the same allergic response in people with predisposition. So what we're seeing around the world, and I'm very, very cautious about this, but I'm sure it's going to pan out. What we're seeing is not an immune response to spike protein. What we're seeing is a tolerance. So when you're exposed to a vaccine and spike protein, you develop a tolerance to spike protein. So when you get the virus itself, you have a degree of tolerance, and so you won't have a severe immune response, and a severe allergic response. And so the claims of curbing severe mortality, severe illness and death, not the claims of preventing infection and transmission. That is dependent on immunity. Preventing severe illness and death is dependent on a degree of tolerance, which, when not exposed to spike protein, will start to wane, and so the boosters. So we're desensitizing people rather than inoculating people. And I think that needs to get looked at closely. I've also seen patients 7 to 10 days after the mRNA vaccines presenting with COVID. A large proportion of patients, 7 to 10 days after the vaccine, coming to me unwell and testing positive for COVID. Now, I've had people around the world contact me and say, oh, it's the Delta variant, and 4 days into the illness, the guy was in ICU. That got nothing to do with the Delta variant. That is an allergic response to spike protein. So what we're dealing with those patients is what we see post-8th day, which I call spike protein illness. So the patient that comes to you 7 to 10 days after a vaccination, feeling unwell, is actually sitting with spike protein illness, not COVID illness. And so he's actually on the 8th day. He skipped the viral phase completely. And so when we think on the 4th day he crashed, which has never happened before, it wasn't his 4th day. It was 4 days after the 8th day, because he started his illness from the 8th day. He missed the viral phase completely. And I'm seeing that. I'm doing blood tests to look at IgE levels to risk stratify those patients that come in 7 to 10 days after vaccination. And I find that those with very high IgE levels on that 7 to 10 day after vaccination are those that are most likely to crash, because they're the ones that are highly allergic to spike protein. So yes, you're absolutely right. We're dealing with an allergic response, and even an allergic response with vaccination. And we need to be considerate of these things if we hope to solve this problem.
Man, this is deep. Woo, Lord, I'm sitting here and I'm thrilled by the conversation. And I think that this is one of those things that to me is so very important. Let's have these types of conversations. If you're just tuning in, Dr. Shankara Chetty from South Africa, giving us his time as we go into the midnight hour there. Thank you so much, Dr. Chetty. You are really, really helping us as Bahamians and helping just to even solidify and undergird and to show that persons like Dr. Kevin Bethel who've been doing it. You know, there's been a lot of pushback. Dr. Bethel has been working in Grand Bahama regardless of all of the naysayers. So thank you so much just for your research as well. We have a call on the line. Let's get to our caller. Caller, you're on the hit back. Welcome.
Godly Day is talking always along with you on your panel, Nahaja.
Hello. Thank you so much, Raymond. Welcome.
Okay. I want to make 2 quick points, please. The first point is the Fleming street medical clinic, the dentist there or the dentist office needs the machine to be fixed, and he sent it to fix from that time.
Raymond, you're going off topic now. I don't want to have to cut you. I need you to get to the question at hand.
Basically, that's what my point for calling.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. All right, we have to take a quick break. South Africa, live from South Africa, Shankara Chetty joining us, of course, all the way from Grand Bahama, the second city. Dr. Kevin Bethel joining us on the show. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, you're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM.
Have you heard about the COVID vaccine raffle? If you are vaccinated against COVID-19, you can enter to win amazing prizes like food store gift certificates, hotel stays, beach excursions, and so much more. Even if you are previously vaccinated, you can still enter to win. The COVID vaccine is free, safe, and protects you from severe COVID-19 infections. Don't delay. Get vaccinated today and enter to win. Visit www.baxbahamas.com to register.
You have a new text message from Scotia.
Scotiabank is adding text messaging to its communication channels to keep customers updated in quicker and safer ways. As of November 4th, Scotiabank will be using text messaging to provide notifications on the minimum payment required for your credit card and due dates. Customers may continue to access their credit card statements on Scotia Online or through our mobile banking app. Learn more by contacting customer care-bahamas at scotiabank.com or call 356-1697.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black.
And we're back. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. We have joining us Dr. Shankara Chetty from South Africa. Dr. Chetty, again, thank you. And Dr. Kevin Bethel joining us from Freeport. Okay, so I got a few questions I want to get to. Dr. Chetty, socioeconomic status. Are there, are your patients, are they tourist-based? Is the population rich or poor? And they wanted to know about monoclonal antibodies now being considered by the Ministry of Health here. Your thoughts on those. So first off, the demographics in Port Edward, South Africa, where you are, really who are your patients? And then secondly, your consideration of monoclonal antibodies.
The patients that I see come from a wide diversity of backgrounds, races, and socioeconomic groups, also from a diversity of comorbidities. I see some very, very poor patients that can't afford service and live in very rural areas that take long hours of transport to get to me. And I see some very affluent patients who have holiday homes that can afford the best of medical care. I found that as far as outcome goes, that made very little difference to my successes. Whether rich or poor made no difference. The treatment for this is not rocket science. If you start early treatment, plot the day that this is going to turn, catch that patient early, you can win the war. So I don't think that the socioeconomic group actually plays a part. I think more important than that is education, understanding of the public as to what's required, and to be aware that if on that fateful day things turn, you get to your doctor immediately. Now, I found that socioeconomics does play a part in educating people. I found that my poorer patients were actually very eager to understand this illness and presented back timeously. I think they were fearful. They knew that this is an illness that would kill. They were there to see me on the first or second day with the sore throat. They got educated about the 8th day, and if they experienced any symptoms, took my advice, heeded my advice, and reported back timeously on the 8th day. It was unfortunately those of higher socioeconomic groups that gave every manner of neighbor and pharmacist a chance to allay this illness, got to me too late, never followed my advice, got to me later than the 8th day, and expected a miraculous recovery. So I think that the education of patients played a vitally important role. And I think sometimes we can be too educated for our own good and we don't follow the instructions appropriately.
Yeah. And Dr. Bethel, your thoughts on that? Monoclonal antibodies, your thoughts on that?
Well, the data looks good, coming from, with what's available, what's it called, Regenicov. I've contacted the company every month for the past 6 months to see if it would be available, and no. I mean, maybe the government has some sort of pull to get it, but me as a private physician, no. They said no. So
no access to it.
No.
Wow.
We can talk about that briefly.
And do we need it though? Is that something? Because I mean, I'm hearing what Dr. Chetty is saying, what you have done, and from what no hospitalization, Dr. Chetty, how many patients have you seen at this point? How many hospitalizations? How many deaths? Just one more time for those who don't believe. What is your number?
I've been through over 7,000 patients now. I'm talking about those that I've seen physically myself. I examined every single one of them. I held their hand through this illness. I monitored their symptoms. I made sure that they got through it. And that's not disregarding, I think, a few hundred patients at least that I've treated over the telephone around the globe. And even in those patients, I still haven't had a death. And they've seen this 8th day phenomenon was seen by all. Even patients around the world that contact me, interrogate them about when their illness started and advise them about what's going to happen on that 8th day if they're allergic to the spike protein. And they would contact me timeously on that day. I would get them to whichever country they're in. This is not about punting certain medications. It's about perspective. So in their respective countries, I would look at what antihistamines they have, what drugs do I have in a toolbox for them, and would advise them accordingly. In all those patients, I haven't had a hospitalization. I have yet to have a death. And I don't keep oxygen in my practice. Yes, there has been need for oxygen in some critically ill patients, which has been provided by the local clinics and things. I would get patients to go there for a few hours every day. But I haven't had a patient be oxygen dependent for more than a day or two, the most critically ill. So we can negate the need for oxygen completely by timeously treating the illness.
I want to ask this. I've got a question here. Dr. Chetty, can you ask Dr. Chetty if COVID-19 if your COVID-19 research has included any patients younger than 18 years old? If so, are the outcomes similar to what he has seen in the adult population?
I've seen a few patients in the younger age group. I'd say from 12 to 20, I've seen about 10 patients. It's not very common in that age group, and those patients tend to recover reasonably. However, once you have a well-developed immune system that has the ability to have a hypersensitivity reaction, you're at risk. It's as simple as that. Younger patients have very underdeveloped immune systems. So children are not at risk. They don't tend to develop severe hypersensitivity reactions. Their immune systems are not that well developed to develop this kind of reaction. So my youngest patient was a patient of 9 years old. Now I've seen hundreds of kids with COVID, and I've not had a single one of them progress into the second phase. They don't have that kind of reaction. So I don't think children are at risk at all. When it comes to the group from, say, 10 to 20, yes, it's less common in that group. But from 20 years onwards, it becomes more and more common. I think that's related to allergic propensity and a developed immune system. So a stronger immune system might be counterproductive. You need a strong immune system to fight the virus. But in the second phase, your strong immune system turns around and starts to fight you. And that's the reason, if you look at the statistics around the world, people that are on immunosuppressants, people taking chemotherapy, people on cancer treatment, Your asthmatics that are already on immunosuppressants or atopy suppressants, allergic suppressants, are the lowest risk of getting the second phase of this illness. Whereas those that are strong and healthy tend to be more at risk. So your immune system turns around and bites you. So I guess we best be cautious trying to keep it as strong as possible when those with weaker immune systems fare a little better. Because the pathology, the death and the damage occurs because your immune system is fighting itself. Yes, in the early phase, you want it to fight the virus. But when it turns around to bite you, you don't want it to be the strongest immune system around because we're trying to suppress it.
You know, and it's so interesting. There was one death I remember getting the, as we were getting more information, and now we're seeing the different age groups, younger persons. One I was told was a marathoner, right, a runner, strong, young female, and with no understanding of comorbidities. We didn't know anything of a comorbidity. This is something that now we're being asked. Well, what was the comorbidity? Maybe she had an underlying issue. It's like all of these things that are being said, and yet there's no proof of it. But then we're supposed to, and this is why I've started to ask more questions. Because when you ask questions, you're not getting answers, but you're told to believe what is said without data. It gets harder for me as someone who's responsible to, if I can't sell something, if I can't believe it, I can't sell it. As someone who is vaccinated, both Dr. Bethel and Dr. Chetty, I understand that, hey, this thing is more of a therapeutic, more so than a vaccine. Since I can still get it, I can still give it. It is. But it will probably be very helpful in keeping me out of the hospital. But am I allergic? And I have questions now, because the first shot I was laid up for days, right? So was that now that spike protein and my body's saying, hey, what are you doing? I don't like this, right? Because it was bad for the first few days. But and now we have a lot of times when people get ill, we are being told, oh, listen, you probably had COVID when you got the shot. Oh. And that's like a new narrative, right? So it's just so many goalposts being moved, but then we're not saying, well, to prove this case, let's test before we, give you the shot to make sure you don't have COVID. So there's just too many goalposts that are moving. So when you mention that, and I'm thinking we have, the question of comorbidities or age and it being indiscriminate over the course, it's very concerning to me. I want to get to some more questions before we, end this. And again, Dr. Chetty, thank you so much. I know it's late. Someone asks, what is the protocol? I hear antihistamine and prednisone. What else? And this is based on your eighth day protocol that is being used in India, that is being used, of course, by yourself in South Africa, around the world. Canada has done research on your 8th-day protocol. MyGov India heralds the work that you've done where rural doctors are taking on this protocol. So you've had successes with others using it. Share with folks what is this 8th-day protocol?
Look, for the general public and for practitioners wishing to try this, it's as simple as treating an allergic reaction. On the 8th day, the reaction can be mild, moderate, or severe, and depending on that, your aggression would change. But the medication you use would remain pretty much the same. What's happening on this day is that you're getting an allergic reaction causing a release of mediators, so you've got to address those mediators. So the treatment uses an antihistamine. It uses montelukast to take away the leukotrienes. It uses an anticoagulant to address platelet activating factor. And it uses a steroid to stop the reaction. Now, yes, we use an antihistamine. The choice of antihistamine varies, but I think the older generation, stronger antihistamines are more effective in strong reactions. And what we've seen in those patients that present with gastroenteritis, that is the release of H2. And so a H2 blocker, like your cimetidine, ranitidine, famotidine, added to that, which is an antihistamine that is active against the gut itself, tends to allay those symptoms. So it's an antihistamine, it's montelukast, which is a leukotriene receptor blocker, and an antiplatelet agent, either clopidogrel or aspirin or one of those. And of course, a steroid at an appropriate dose to make sure you've reversed this reaction. So it's as simple as that. I don't think there's anything unusual about the way I treat it. I think it's more about the perspective.
I want to ask this other question before we go. Actually, let me get to this caller. We have a caller on the line. Caller, you're on the hit back. Thank you so much for holding. Welcome.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Haja.
How you doing?
And good evening to Dr. Chetty and Dr. Bethel.
Bethel, yes.
Two of the greatest. Dr. Chetty is a truth seeker and a truth teller. And so I know what he's saying is correct because I've been following Dr. Girth, Dr. Cahill, Dr. Topol, Dr. Sheen Cordy. And so from he mentioned antihistamine, I know it's linked to mast cell syndrome or mast cell activated syndrome that leads to long haulers, right? And so what the question I have to ask him is the fact that is there any way for them to test the histamine or histidine levels produced by the mast cells, because the mast cells are known to produce many molecules that cause inflammation and cytokine storms, right? So the fact that he's talking about antihistamine, I know he know what he's doing, and so most Western doctors can't conceive this, and so there are cell receptors on the mast cells for the IgE. And so the he could just correct me because the IgE is really in the mucosa, and the IgM and the IgM and the IgG are mostly what's in the serum. So I'm looking at the inflammatory response, and I wanted to know if foods high in histamine would increase my level of cytokinemic or inflammatory response to this disease. And I want Dr. Chetty to know I have already listened to other doctors, and his consensus I just wanted to know what do you think of the spike protein, the physical projections on the spike protein causing endothelial damage as they move through the extremities and the blood vessels. How long is this spike protein produced?
Thank you, my brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All
right. Dr. Chetty, that's a lot of questions.
Okay, the first question, the markers that you're looking for, histamine, like I said, histamine can be tested. It's a urine sample. You've got to collect a 24-hour urine sample, but you've got to defer antihistamines for that period while you collect the sample. It will affect the result. Now, deferring antihistamines for a day can be a critically wrong decision. The patient will come back the next day critically ill. So yes, it's something that I wanted to prove, but in my clinical setting, a little too dangerous. IgE and tryptase levels are also something that can prove the release of histamine. But these values tend to take time to develop. So they're not consistent in every patient. But I tested all the long COVID cases because they've had sufficient time to develop this. And those patients we just spoke about who develop COVID-like symptoms 7 to 10 days after vaccination. And a lot of them have elevated IgE levels, more so in the long COVID cases. A majority of them showed highly elevated levels of IgE, which points towards the allergic trigger and a mast cell deactivation or a mast cell activation that's occurring over a prolonged period. And treatment of long COVID using that kind of perspective, that you're dealing with a mast cell activation syndrome, tends to give you very good results in reversing long COVID. As far as the spike protein goes, we're talking of a protein that's little known to human beings. It was the reason a bat coronavirus found favor with human tissue. And so we know from the COVID illness that exposure to spike protein can trigger an allergic response. And that's what we see on the 8th day, and we try and negate that. But remember, with a virus, you have a very transient exposure to spike protein. So like penicillin can cause an allergy, but penicillin also has a biologic activity in being an antibiotic. So it's vitally important now that we're exposing people with vaccines to long-term spike protein exposure. We need to understand the full biologic activity of spike protein. Now we know with COVID illness that those that got severely ill had endothelial injuries. So they developed clots and that kind of thing if they weren't treated timeously. And we're seeing that as well with the vaccines, that exposure to spike protein is actually triggering endotheliitis, and that will manifest in patients with pre-existing vessel injury, diabetics, hypertensives, and the rest, that will be more prone to developing clots with the long-term exposure to the spike protein. Now, with boosters more than the emergency use authorization had catered for, we're going to have even longer-term exposure to spike protein. So the biologic effects of spike protein on the human body are vitally important in understanding the long-term consequences of a mass vaccination campaign. Now, Just to put that into perspective, we know about the endothelial injuries that occur a few weeks to a few months after exposure to the spike protein. But also we've seen that spike protein can suppress immunity because the vaccines are causing a reemergence of other illnesses like shingles, like cytomegalovirus, respiratory syncytial viruses. We've seen the reemergence of cancers. So we know that spike protein can suppress immunity, and we need to be very cautious about that and investigate it further. We're also aware that spike protein is a membrane protein. And so when a cell makes spike protein, it will be tricked into incorporating that spike protein into its membrane. So we know that the messenger RNA vaccines spread throughout your body. They're not limited to your shoulder. And so every cell that makes spike protein has the possibility of incorporating that spike protein into its membrane. And in doing so, your immune system will recognize that your tissue as foreign, because it now has spike protein on it. And that has the ability to trigger a myriad of autoimmune conditions. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing Guillain-Barré, we're seeing CJD, we know about the diabetes, and it might be immune-mediated destruction to your pancreatic cells. So yes, there's a lot coming, but if we don't look at all the side effects of vaccination, which is generally a long-term exposure to spike protein, we have little hope of understanding this. And for those that feel there's always this problem with people not willing to acknowledge vaccine side effects, I think that's disingenuous. Every side effect should be considered, especially in view of the fact that we don't know what's in the vaccine. So if you don't know what's in the vaccine, every single thing should be considered a side effect. So we don't cherry pick what we think are side effects from what we understand. We'll never gain further understanding that way. We need to look at the vaccines with all-cause mortality and morbidity. Every death, every injury needs to be documented. And when you compare unvaccinated and vaccinated patients, any significance in those statistics needs to be further investigated.
We have to, it's amazing the time, and I have to get, this conversation definitely is one that can be done over and over. Dr. Chetty, I know it's almost midnight in South Africa, so I thank you so much for the time. And of course, anyone can go online and find you. Dr. Kevin Bethel, of course, Doc, I know that you've been doing marvelous work there in Grand Bahama, and folks who are watching are very much singing your praises for the work that you've done. We're going to take a quick break. Thank you so much, Dr. Chetty, Dr. Bethel. Thank you so much. When we come back, we've got another group of wonderful ladies who are saying, you need to get your eyes sorted out. And I wanted them on the heels of this show because I need y'all to stay in medical frame of mind. I want to thank you guys again for your time with us. You're listening to The Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Dr. Shankara Chetty, Dr. Kevin Bethel. We will be back right after this.
J.S. Johnson Insurance agents are the best. Reliable service, we've been on the scene, protecting since 1919. J.S. Johnson Insurance has the test. You'll always cover me. J.S. Johnson Insurance, peace of mind.
Attention all students in grade 4 to 12. Do you think you know about money? Well, the Central Bank of the Bahamas is giving you a chance to prove it and win cash in the 2021 Get Money Smart Bahamas Video Essay Competition. Can you tell us why you think the Bahamian economy is an ideal model for digital financial services? If you can, just produce a short video submission before October 22nd and show us you are money smart. Cash prizes will be given in various age categories, but you must get your parents' permission to enter. For more information, visit www.getmoneysmartbahamas.com or see our post on social media.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. It's the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. It's the Hit Back
And we're back. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. All right, listen, I know that show, y'all know, I know of what I'm going to expect. I know it ain't going to be easy. I going to get all kind of pushback, but I gave all my doctors the time and the chance to really ask questions. And my goal is not to break the apple cart. I'm not trying to be a renegade. I'm actually wanting not to have someone else I know die from COVID-19. And if there's any options, anything out there that we have seen medically that has helped persons, that's my goal. Now I want to switch gears though, and not too much so, not too much. I switch gears too much because I've got these wonderful ladies joining me on the show. I've got President, make sure I got all my data right? I got to make sure all of my information is on point, because when Bahamian women show up on a show, they're smart and they're beautiful, and so you got to get it together. I've got President of the Bahama Society of Ophthalmic, look at God, ophthalmic nurses, Madam Tamara Donaldson. Mrs. Donaldson, yes. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very
then,
much.
Of course, I have Dr. Audrey Fernanda Lightbourne joining us on the show. Ladies, thank you so much for being here.
We're happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Listen, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate the fact that y'all gave me the leeway because we're late. So I don't want to waste any time. One of the things that I want to talk about, what you guys want to talk about, is the prevention of blindness. And I'm so happy because y'all know I wear contacts, so I always feel like I'm like 4 minuses from blindness, but docs say my eyes are good. But my mother and my mother-in-law both have had cataract surgery. Mm-hmm. And so it seems so prevalent. I want you guys to tell me about this month and about the prevention of blindness. Who goes first?
Madam President.
And unmute you. There you go.
Yes. Well, good day to you, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So this month here, actually, it's 2 things going on. It's World Health Day was actually yesterday. World Sight Day was yesterday on the 14th. But so we deem this month as actually sight awareness, but we also do blind awareness, because we have a lot of persons in that population in our community. So we do those simultaneously. So for the Bahama Society of Ophthalmic Nurses, we have a number of events going on for the entire month, and we already went through some of them. But coming up at the end of the month on the 30th, we're going to be having our first hunkathon. Due to COVID, we're not having a walkathon. It's a hunkathon. It's a major fundraiser. Our largest fundraiser that we'll be having to raise funds for glasses for children and also adults.
This is excellent stuff. I like hunkathons. That means I got to walk nowhere. You see,
exactly.
Dr. Lightbourne, why is this important for us? Why should Bahamians be paying attention to blindness and blindness prevention?
Well, for a number of reasons. There are a number of preventable causes of blindness that our population, a large percentage of our population, suffer from. And we have glaucoma, which basically is asymptomatic. And the only way that you will know that you have it is to be tested. It runs in family. It's very prevalent in people of African descent. And the manifestation of it is so late. By the time people are aware, it's in the advanced stage, and the disease is irreversible. And then we have the diabetic population in our country, who basically, because of poor diabetes control, the sugar levels are high, the micro vessels in the eye leak, and so they have bleeding in the eye, and that is a very difficult condition to treat. And so as a society, what we have been mandated in our vision and mission is to educate, raise awareness, advocate for the people of the Bahamas. So we have been engaging in a number of public outreach where we've been doing free screening and referring abnormal findings to the ophthalmologist and the optometrist. These 2 groups of professionals within the eye discipline are responsible for doing comprehensive eye examinations based on our preliminary findings and intervening either with glasses or with treatment modalities.
You know, one of the things, and I guess for this event, I want to find out from you guys, how do we show our support? Because like I said, for me, I've seen this issue with my parents, right? So my mother and my mother-in-law, and you know, my mom is saying I need to get, you know, and I know with COVID, a lot of the clinics have been down. It's been a little difficult for folks to get their appointments and whatnot. How do we get, is it everything back to normal to a certain degree post, or not in COVID, not no post COVID, but in COVID?
In the midst of COVID.
Yeah.
And so in the new normal, we're calling it now, but no, it's not back to normal as yet. Some of our ophthalmic nurses are employed with the Ministry of Health, Public Hospitals Authority, and the private sector. But so it is a little difficult right now because many of the ophthalmic nurses were dispersed to other areas. Most of them are frontliners, including myself. And so we've had to more or less not push it on the side, but try to make adjustments. So I cannot speak for the ministry's behalf. However, if someone has an eye condition, I'm sure they're still able, or if they're having an emergencies still go to the hospital. But in terms of eye conditions, you're still able to get referrals from the community clinic and access those same avenues. Now, we don't have the same setup in the Ministry of Health that we had before with being able to see an ophthalmologist at the South Beach Clinic because, you know, now that's the COVID center. So there are adjustments. So that is one of the reasons why we are the Bahama Society of Ophthalmic Nurses, also called BSON, BSON, why we're doing so many of the outreach programs. We have something we're also doing Saturday and Sunday in conjunction with the Rotary Club. And so that's why we're doing so much. We're doing it here in New Providence and also the Family Islands. And so if you want to, you want more information on that, our email is bsophthalmicnurses@gmail.com. Also, it's best if you WhatsApp our number 805-0603. And also we're on Facebook, so you can private message the Bahama Society of Ophthalmic Nurses, and our members are also on Facebook. So it's just a matter, I'm sorry that everything has to be done electronically most of the time, but that is the way to reach us at this time.
Yeah. And I want to thank you, ladies. Let's get those numbers one more time, Ms. Donaldson, for folks who want to reach out to you. One more time.
Okay. You can WhatsApp message, text message, voice note, 805-0603. Also, you can...
So one more time.
805-0603. Also, you can email bsophthalmicnurses@gmail.com.
And spell ophthalmic, because Lord, I wouldn't have been able to get that if you didn't write that down. Spell that.
Yes.
Too.
So it's BS Ophthalmic Nurses, the letters BS, and then write OPHTHALMIC, and then nurses, of course, NURSES. So all of that into one at gmail.com.
You're the best. Listen, ladies, thank you so much. I appreciate your coming on the show. And, you know, I wanted to give you more time and I got carried away. But thank you so much. And Dr. Lightbourne knows how to reach me now, Ms. Donaldson. So you got me on cell phone. You got me. So we can do this again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Black.
Thank you guys so much. And I appreciate you both for the work you do. Trust me, I do.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. The goal of the show, my purpose, my job, it is not, I'm not trying to disrupt. I'm not trying to disrupt stuff. I'm not looking for clicks. I just can't. There's things you want to be able to do, want to be able to find answers for. And if we can stop the tide of deaths, if there's even a glimmer of hope that we can overcome what is happening in the hospital, then it is a part of our job to find them all and test them and study. I say, don't take anything at anyone's word of mouth. You know, I don't have to believe Dr. Chetty's word, but I think that we should test. I think that we should do a study. And if it works, then hip hop, hooray, ho. And if it doesn't, then we know that it was nothing. But we've got to try it more than what we've been doing. It hasn't been working. And a lot of the things comes because we're not getting answers. We want scientific data. Don't tell me now, I got COVID-like symptoms after the shot. You might have had COVID before. Did you test? Don't guess. Let's do this. Let's work together. The Bahamian people require more answers. And as we add more numbers, those are real humans added to the death toll. Every day since July, we've lost someone. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja, Black Guardian Radio. Stay safe, everyone. Stay safe. Stay safe. We're not out of the woods. See you on Monday. We're out.